You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, good to be back with you again. After spending a few days at trail days, then hiking back on the Appalachian Trail for another 5 days. I'm going to talk briefly about both of those things later. But first, you are listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. just a thunder in the background. That's helpful. I'm Steve Adams of Mighty Blue, and we've got another full show for you this week. First guest today is Mark Beno, or Papa Dump. Mark and his son David, or Forrest Dump, went on their through hike in 2022, and even though they started in March, they chose to do a flip-flop, starting in Damascus and pretty much missing the bubble. They loved it, even taking their dog Pearl with them for about 750 miles. Mark will be along in a moment to share their story. We'll be catching up with just 2 of our Mighty Blue class of 2023 this week, as I'm taking up a bit of time to talk about the trail days and then the hike afterwards. In the class of 23, our last starter, Nancy Farrell, is heading out on her flip-flop this week, while Betty McEnaney shares her bad weather, bad pack stories from this past couple of weeks. Finally, then the hail came, has George in Vermont and heading into the business end of an AT through hike. So let's get started. Here's Mark Beno, or Papa Dump. Our guest today did a flip-flop of the Appalachian Trail last year with his son and, for part of the way, his dog. This is Mark Beno, or Papa Dump. Hey Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great, Steve. Thanks.
Well, I don't always ask this as the next question, but I must ask this. Why on earth are you Papa Dump?
Well, I was given it by the trail, and I actually started off with a different name. I was 5 more minutes for a big portion of the trail, but my son, David, who went with me, and he was 25 at the time, and he was Forrest Dump. He named himself, gave himself his own trail name. And so people were, along the trail, what's your name? This is Forrest Dump, and I'm 5 more minutes. And they're, what do we call you? 5? Mr. 5? 5 more? And one guy said, it was like up and like halfway through or so, he said, why don't you just call yourself Papa Dump? You got Forrest Dump and Papa Dump. And I said, you know what? That makes sense. And so I was Papa Dump from then on.
So you wear that name proudly. It's funny, actually. It's not that it's a subservient name, because Forrest Dump is the main name, obviously. And so you're just the father of Forrest, which is kind of weird how people take on those different names. So you went with David, or Forrest Dump. Whose idea was it to go on the AT in the first place? Because the 2 generations don't always mix, do they? So what was it like in terms of who made the decision to go?
Well, we've always enjoyed being outdoors and camping. I have 5 kids. I grew up one of 4 boys up in upstate New York, Adirondacks. We lived in Washington State as well. And for fun, for vacations, we used to go camping or backpacking. My parents would take all 4 of us boys backpacking. In fact, the first time we went like 30 miles in Washington State. And my youngest brother was 4, and my oldest was 9, and I was 8. So they had 4 little boys backpacking, and I remember that. And so I grew up doing it and really enjoyed it, and then got married, and we started having kids, and we liked to camp. We didn't do any backpacking.
And didn't stop, apparently. Didn't stop, apparently.
That's right.
5 kids, yeah.
That's right.
That'll take a bit of time, yeah.
That will. Oh, yeah, for sure. But so we always enjoyed the outdoors. And the kids enjoyed camping. And then, as they get older, high school, they go out with their friends camping and all that stuff. And then, most of them end up leaving the house and all. David was still living at home at the time. And I had come across the Appalachian Trail. My parents moved down here to Georgia 30 years ago. Right. And so they backpacked all of Georgia and into North Carolina, actually up to Winding Stair Gap, over 5 years or so. And we were still up in Ohio at the time. We hadn't moved down here. And they said, hey, there's this thing called the Appalachian Trail. So I just interested. Okay, whatever. We moved down here, and then, I'm in Atlanta. And so we're an hour and a half from Springer Mountain. And so we ended up going there fairly regularly as a family just to do like the approach trail. I've done the approach trail like 5 or 6 times, and the kids have too. And so it was that was our first time on the AT, or on the, close to it, the approach.
At what age did you first learn of the Appalachian Trail then?
I learned of it, probably 25 years ago when my parents started doing it.
Because it's amazing to me how many people don't know about it. So, and you actually didn't until you were well into adulthood as well. So
I really didn't. Yeah, I didn't know what it was. I didn't realize that people through hiked it or anything.
Right.
Until my parents did it. Then again, they did, 110 miles or so in 5 or 6 years.
Sure.
And then they quit doing it, and they ended up buying land up in Blue Ridge, and that's where they live. But we moved down here and then started taking our kids on it. And so it was always kind of like in their blood, in my blood, to camp and stuff. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, with YouTube, of course, and all of that, following people as they do their through hike. And I was, kind of bemoaning the fact that I'd love to do it someday and probably won't get a chance. And I think, 2 years ago, my wife finally said, why don't you just shut up and do it? And I was like, oh, okay, we'll do it. And so
hang on. Is this your version, or did she just not say, why don't you just shut up?
She's saying,
stop talking about it. Go and get it done. So
I think that's what it was.
So this was something, and it does take hold of people this way as well. Once you go down that rabbit hole, you get that feeling you kind of want to do it. When did it become logistically likely that you could do it, and then you start making your plans? Was this about a year before you went, or was it you said, this I'm going to do?
It was March 2021. We left March 15th, 2022, and that was the only thing we had planned, of course, was our starting date. After that, it was day by day. So a year before, that's when she had said, hey, why don't you go ahead and do it? And so we planned to start then. And so work and all that stuff, at one point I had said, I'm going to retire. And I think it was more looking at it now, because I'm back to working full time. I had talked about retiring. And then, it took me 5 months to hike the trail. It took me 5 months to recover. And then I needed something to do. And so I'm back to work. But it was really because she was able to do everything at home, take care of the home front and all that stuff. That's the only reason we were able to go. I did not plan on going until after I was retired in my, mid-60s or whatever. So I'm very, very happy that she was able to do that. And she gave us really the approval to go ahead and do it.
So have you gone back to, what were you doing for a living, by the way? What was your job? Was it still
I'm an
the same
accountant.
job?
CPA.
All right, you could do that anywhere, can't you?
Exactly.
you could have done it on the trail. You could have done it on the trail, probably, couldn't you?
Well, I felt bad. I felt bad about telling my employer, hey, can you just have someone fill in for me for 6 months? So I said, you know what, we're going to do a clean break. And it turns out that's what I need. And it's funny because now I'm working for the same overall company. I work actually for the church, and it's for the corporate side of it.
Sure.
And so I really enjoy that. But again, it was my wife saying, yeah, why don't you guys just go ahead and do it? So we had a year to plan. We were doing hikes once a month, me and David, and sometimes my other son, Johnny, who's a fishing guide in Asheville. He would come with us. And of course, I always brought Pearl. Pearl is our Australian Shepherd. She turned 2 years old on the trail.
Nice.
We wanted her to come along just so she could carry her own pack. On all the practice hikes.
Did she tend to do? So she did the practice hikes as well. So you knew she was up for it.
She did every single practice hike. The hard part was trying to find bad weather. We knew, you hear about the rain. Of course, you really don't know what it means to hike in the rain for that long, do you? Until you actually do it.
No,
you have no idea.
It's tough.
And it's tough, especially on our flop that we came down, the flop part of it, and coming down back into North Carolina and Georgia. We hit some bad rain the last week or so. But other than that, we were very fortunate with the weather. It turned out really good. But with Pearl,
you had a very hot summer though, didn't you?
It didn't seem hot. You know why? I think because up north, it's not as humid. I mean, it can be humid, but you're at elevation. when
Yeah,
it
you
was,
were there.
you
You
know,
were there relatively early, weren't you?
we
In terms
were.
of being north, yeah.
In June and July, I mean, I remember there were 2 days on a weekend in New York when it was in the 90s.
Wow.
Other than that, it was in the 70s and 80s. And it started out, of course, in March in the 40s and 50s,
Yeah,
for the first
sure,
month or
sure.
so. And that was great hiking, right?
So, how did Pearl cope with the trail? I mean, because I know she did 700 odd miles, I think it was. But so, how did she cope with it? Was she a trooper, or did she struggle with it?
Now she's an Australian Shepherd, so she's a work dog. And
Right.
so she had a year of practice carrying, 5 pounds. She's a 50-pound dog, carried 10% of her weight, 5 pounds, and went on all the practice hikes. She did really well. Now she was tired. At the end of the day, I would put her, our standard thing was I would, and Dave and I didn't really hike together during the day. We usually started and ended at the same place.
Sure.
But during the day, we started off trying to hike the same. But it really got frustrating for the first 2 weeks. Just, he'd get up, I'd get up early and I'm waiting for him and he's that kind of thing. It didn't work. And so we said, you know what, we're okay. Let's hike separately. And that worked out great.
Yeah, to end up in the same place together is good enough for hiking together, isn't it? You can do it. I mean, I hate seeing two people hiking one behind the other. I just think it's wrong for one of them, and I'm not sure who that one is.
It really is. And, we ran into a couple. I ended up buying a tent halfway through. I went from a 3-man tent. Once I sent Pearl home after 2 months. Sarah and my daughter Rachel came exactly 60 days into our hike and met us up in Pennsylvania at Port
Off that
Clinton.
dreadful downhill into Port Clinton.
It was a crazy downhill. It was also the day after we saw our first rattlesnake, and so that really kind of freaked me out a little bit because once you see your first one, then it's a little easier. But that first one, we were 4 miles south of where they were going to pick us up. And I stopped for the day. I was waiting on Dave to get there because that's usually how it worked. I was more focused on getting up, getting out of camp, and hiking. I rarely stopped unless there was someone I was going to talk to. I always made a time to talk to people. I figured if you can't, in a 5 or 6 month hike, if you can't take 5 or 10 minutes and talk to people, you're in it for the wrong reason. I really believe that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You do learn that. And so I would go and I would hike and I would have my goal was like, I need to get to where we need to be, whether it's, 12 miles, 15, 18 miles out. I want to get there so that I can set up camp and rest. Now he embraced more the thru hiker mentality, I believe. He ended up getting a fur coat along the way and he wore that thing for 2 months. Remember that schoolhouse in Virginia? There's a schoolhouse that the trail goes right by, and you go inside there. Well, he picked it up there. That was like the first week or two on the trail, and so he wore this. So he was a guy in the fur coat. That's who he was. I was always the dad of the guy in the fur coat. He was the guy in the fur coat, and we hiked separately during the day, and then we ended up the same place. And I had Pearl. I took Pearl with me, and she did great the whole time. But when we got to camp, I would, set up my tent. The first 2 months, we didn't stay in any shelters or very few hostels because of the dog. I didn't want to put other people around her. It wasn't fair to them being on the trail. And I was aware of that. So I camped, and Dave would actually cowboy camped the entire way.
Yeah, I want to ask about that in a minute, actually, but I want to talk about why you I know you started March, you've already referred to that, the middle of March, but you didn't do a no-bow from Springer. What was the purpose behind that? Because most people kind of would. So you decided you wanted that solitude or what?
Avoid the bubble. I had a dog. We didn't want to get on the trail with 50 other people starting every day. And, we always think in our minds that how crazy, it's not like it's wall-to-wall people. I wouldn't think along the trail, even in Georgia in March and April, but it's busy. And we didn't want that. We ran into enough people starting out in Damascus, where we started. And we ran into enough people there, and Pearl did great. And, it lasted, again, 2 months on the trail. In the end, she lost 5 pounds of her weight, which was 10% of her weight. And that was one of the reasons why I sent her home.
Well, I'd like to ask about that because you left in March from Damascus. So that must have been pretty quiet north of Damascus. And then you got the Grayson Highlands and so on after that, haven't you? What was it like in those early days? Because I know it's quite a good climb up out of Damascus, isn't there?
It was, yeah. And, of course, it's not as crazy, I don't think, as Georgia and North Carolina. And, the mountains you're kind of coming down into it's getting a little flatter as you get further north. Of course, it took us 6 weeks to get through our first state. And so we knew that was going to be a challenge, right? As opposed to getting through 80 miles of Georgia in however many days, a week or whatever. It took us 6 weeks to get up to Harper's Ferry. But we started off the right way too. And really more, my excuse was because of Pearl, but really for us, we started like 10 or 12 miles a day for the first week. And we upped it by 2 miles a day each week. So the second week, 14 miles a day. Third, fourth, fifth, we didn't hit 20 until probably the sixth week that we were on trail.
That's kind of disciplined, actually, especially for a younger guy. So were you taking the lead in all this, or because you were hiking separately, or did your son defer to you making the choice of how far you're going to hike and so on? Was he trying to, because I presume at 25 he's fitter than you. Maybe he's not, but I presume he probably is almost by the numbers. Did you say, this is what I feel I can do, or did you just work it out as a compromise between you?
Well, yeah, we kind of said from the beginning, we don't want to overdo it, again, with a dog, but also for us. We knew long term, it's those little nagging injuries that you get, the overuse and all that stuff that we heard of. And so he was good about, hanging back with Dad, I guess, because he probably could have gone. He is a stronger hiker than me, but he also took his time more on the trail than I did. He would stop at a lot of the shelters and eat a late breakfast or hit a lunch, and that just wasn't my style. My style was to get to where I wanted to go, with Pearl during that time. So he was fine. We actually, after the first 2 or 3 weeks, we split up. And Dave said, which I was fine with, he said, hey, you know what, let's go the next week or so apart. So we spent actually a couple of weeks.
How do you feel about that at the time?
I thought it was great. It was fine to have a little space. I was kind of excited about hiking with just me and Pearl, even though, Dave was really during the day on his own. But at night, that's always a challenge, sleeping in the woods by yourself or whatever, even if you have a dog. And, that took a little getting used to and all, because you know how it is. Every little leaf crunch is a bear, right?
Absolutely. It is. And it is. And everything is a bear or a snake somewhere.
Everything is a bear or a snake. Yep.
So I want to I'm jumping ahead a little bit, so I want to ask you a couple of things in your early days in a minute. You talked about your son cowboy camping. I want to ask about that now. What was that like? We can't ask him what it was like, but is this something he's done much of over the years? Is this something he felt comfortable doing? Because personally, if I was sleeping in the woods, I want to be inside my tent. There's a certain amount of security. No bugs don't come in and no snakes come in. Was he quite relaxed about that?
He was, because, he, again, would go out with a lot of his friends. In fact, they're planning on going this weekend up to Three Forks, just up by Springer Mountain. They do a lot of camping and stuff up there. And that's how they camp. If it's good weather, he'll sleep outside, like on a tarp or something in a sleeping bag. But he was fine with doing it. I was absolutely not fine with doing it.
I was going to ask you whether you did it. So.
No, not even one night. I was in my tent, especially the day we saw that snake. It was a 5-foot rattler coming across the trail. I was in my tent. I figured I couldn't get into a tent. So I was in my tent, but he cowboy camped almost the entire way.
That's wonderful. I love the spirit of youngsters who, and it sounds patronising saying he's a youngster because he's an adult, but of younger people happy to embrace that part of the trail. And I think it's a wonderful part of the trail. Now, I know that you met a ridiculously generous trail angel, didn't you? Tell us about that story.
Yeah,
I've never heard one as good as this.
Yeah, I know. I hadn't either. 2 or 3 weeks in, and we're in Virginia, and we come across this field, and we see these balloons on the right-hand side of the trail, and we read it, and it's spelled out 1,000 congrats. That's what it said. We're like, what the heck is that for? Had no idea. 5 minutes later, there's a guy coming at us. It looks like he's slack packing. And we stop and talk to him. He's like, well, you guys haven't seen some balloons around here, have you? So actually, we have. He goes, well, those are for me. This guy had been section hiking or lashing and had finished up 1,000 miles. And so he explained that. We're like, oh, cool. And then right before he left, he goes, hey, you guys look like you could use this. And he whipped out a wad of $100 bills and gave one to each me and to David. And that was the coolest thing. I wasn't going to push my luck,
No.
And the sad thing is I've spent it about, 20 times over. It was always that, well, should we spend, get off trail? Yeah, let's do it. We got that $100. And after 10 times, you're like, oops, we spent it. But yeah, super nice. Trail angels. I tell you what, trail angels, you couldn't do the trail, or let's just say it would be very difficult to do the trail this day and age without trail angels along the way. Holy cow.
Oh, yeah. But it's not only, but I'm sure you'll be the first to agree, it's not only the fact they gave you money and they give you food and they help you out, but it's those serendipitous little things that happen, isn't it? Someone shows you a kindness. That's real trail magic to me. And you get shown kindnesses all the way up the trail. Well, I certainly was, and I'm sure you were as well.
Absolutely. Whether it's a hitch, a ride. I mean, I was 9 for 10 in hitches. I had never hitchhiked in my life, never even thought about it. I went 9 for 10. So I was, people are so nice. Like I said, the people that they're just helping these hikers that they don't know who they are. They don't know where they're from. Some of them probably don't even know the entire length of the trail. They just know they live close to this trail and they see a lot of hikers coming through and they help them out. I mean, how much kinder can you get than that?
It's lovely. It's lovely. But do you think starting when you did, deliberately to avoid the bubble and so on, do you think that you missed some of the community aspects of the trail by doing it the way you did? Or is that a choice that you're glad you made? Because, if you listen to the show, and so, I love the idea of community on the trail, you must have missed quite a bit of it, although you say you spoke to people, obviously. Do you feel there was some part of the community that you missed?
No, I just feel like I was fortunate to miss the bubble, all those people. And we ran into people every day. We talked to people. We camped. We ended up getting a tramily along the way, especially the section, the last 3 or 4 states. We were hiking with the same 9 or 10 people most of the way, kind of leapfrogging back and forth. And so we definitely had enough people, especially after we sent Pearl home in Pennsylvania after 2 months. And then we were able to stay in more hostels and stuff. And of course, that's where you see more people. Even at the shelters, I would rather set up my tent. I enjoy setting my tent up. It reminds me of being a kid, doesn't it? It really does.
I know what you mean. Yeah, totally.
It really does. It brought it back for me. And I enjoy setting up the tent and sleeping in it and then taking it down in the morning. And, I'm thinking other through hikers.
Oh, I could definitely do without the taking it down in the morning bit. I could
well, if it's not raining.
If
it's not raining.
Oh, yeah, terrible. Yeah, packing up a wet tent has got to be the worst. And when you wrote to me about your hike, you mentioned that this was, and this struck me that I wanted to ask you more about that. This was more of a bucket list item, more than a bucket list item to you.
Yeah, it's more than
what does that mean?
To me, it's just more than a checkbox. This was, and maybe you don't realize until after you do it, how much it really meant to you and how much of a part of your life it is. And how, and I've heard you say, and I've heard other thru hikers say, you think about this silly thing every day when you're done. And the little things, like say you're walking up stairs and you're thinking, you know what? I did this 100 times in one day. And it wasn't this hard. So you think about this, even if you're you're sitting on a chair somewhere, you're like, wow, I remember I didn't have a chair on the trail. I had to sit on the ground. You just learn to appreciate so many things. And to me, it just has become a part of, I didn't realize the magnitude that the part of my life that it would become until after I did it. I knew it was important to me, but now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, it really kind of helps define, not totally, but helps define who I am.
I think it grows as time goes on as well. You don't get less attracted to the idea of it that you've done it. You get more attractive and more enamored with the idea that you've done it. Now, I am a through hiker. That is a real expression to me. And I think I use the word that when I touched Katahdin, I felt terribly accomplished, not in a braggadocious sort of way, but more a case of I've done something that the vast majority of the people in this country either can't or don't or won't do. And I feel so good about that each time. And I feel my love of the trail grows rather than diminishes over time. And I think about it literally even now, quite apart from the fact I do the podcast, but I literally think about the trail every single day, probably 3 or 4, maybe 10 times a day.
Yeah, I agree. And, it's the through hikers, but then it's also the lashers, the section hikers. We summited Katahdin with a family of teachers. There were 2, a mom and a dad, and then their daughter was like David's age. And that was their 7th summer hiking. And
Nice.
For through hikers, it's one thing because you don't understand the pain until you get out there. And, the first week of your legs throbbing, and then the second and third, and then you're hiking through rain or snow or sleet, or you wake up in the morning, your hands are freezing. I mean, you're tired at the end of the day. The section hikers, they come back for that each year. It's
voluntarily.
Amazing. Voluntarily, they do that. I am more amazed at section hikers that finish the trail like that.
Well, when I started, I asked Jester to start the Jester Section Hiker podcast. I was hiking with her actually on the ATO in 2019. And I said, and I wasn't trying to flatter her. Well, I wanted her to do it, obviously. But I said to her, you know what, you guys, you section hike, I want to start a trail for section hike, a podcast for section hikers, because they're the real heroes, because literally sometimes they do it every other weekend or every weekend they get out on the trail with terrible legs. No, it must be a nightmare for them, but they do it. And I quite agree with you, but it's the section hikers who would do it. So talking about, you hiked with Pearl, and then you and David separated for some of the time as well. Then you weren't with Pearl. How different was your hike after hiking with Pearl?
The real reason I sent Pearl home was for my own selfishness, because I knew with the states coming up, Vermont, New Hampshire, which I think is the hardest state, and then Maine, of course, doesn't get any easier when you get into Maine. I mean, you expect, I wished it, I kept saying, Maine has not gotten any easier.
Definitely not.
At all. And to send Pearl home, we increased our mileage because, we were, I always was thinking of her. And that's the thing. You're really not hiking your hike. You're hiking the dog's hike because you're always thinking of the dog. Dave and I were fortunate. We'd go into a town to resupply, and one of us would hold the dog and the other would go in and get food. Well, if you don't have anyone to hold your dog, I'm not sure how you go in. It's a little sketchier. Yeah. So you have all those things to think about. There's so much to think about. And I knew I had to focus if I was going to make it through New Hampshire. And I, of course, didn't know really what to expect, because how can you if you haven't done it? Yeah. It's one thing to watch videos or read things, but until you actually do it, you don't know what it's like climbing those 6,000 foot peaks and everything, and up and down, and Mount Washington, which was a wonderful to get past Mount Washington. That was really the first time that I felt like we're going to get this thing done. Up until Mount Washington, I was a little apprehensive.
And yet, after Mount Washington, there's one of the worst climb. Well, you go down, you go up Madison, which I loved, by the way, this like pointed mountain. Then the climb down from Madison is endless and really difficult as well. So there's lots of problems on the way. Your relationship with your son, how did that develop on the hike? And did you notice it developing at all?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there was no huge, monumental change. I think over time, I think we have now an appreciation for each other. We both accomplished something together that's pretty cool that most
shared
people haven't. And so, you talk about being strong. You talk about, I look at a young man who able to finish something like that. Wow. If you can finish a thru hike like that, you can tackle most problems in this world. And so I think it's more just that appreciation for each other. It's not like, the things are totally different. I knew he was a good kid, a strong hiker, and all that. He talks well with strangers. He just, he's kind of a quiet kid. I'm kind of quiet too, the reserved accountant type. But when you're out there, you could be quiet, I guess, but you really get a chance to talk to people, and it's amazing. Everyone's in the same boat. That was the thing that got me. Everyone is on that trail, and doesn't matter where you are. You could be in the middle of a storm somewhere. All you got to think about is there are thousands of other people on that trail right the same time that I'm there. And it really makes it, you're kind of like all in the same boat. And other people are going through the same things you're going through. And it really makes it so that you say, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. And that really helped me.
And it's an entirely, as you say, it's an entirely egalitarian process, the whole thing. You may be an accountant, he may be a banker, he may be a shit shoveler, I have no idea. But you all become hikers. That's what you all are. We all get reduced to the level of being exactly the same. I love that part of it, and I always have that part of it.
It's the great equalizer, isn't it? The trail is Absolutely. The great equalizer, and we don't even know people's real names. Everyone has a trail name, and that's fine. Yeah. You don't care what people do unless they ask or you tell them. Most of us, I guess if you're hiking with a family, you end up kind of knowing those people a little more. But You're right. Overall, Everyone is on the same journey, hitting the same thing. And by the way, if we hadn't have finished, to me, that wouldn't have been satisfying. To me, that would have been, I would have looked at it as a failure, as a learning.
That was a lot of most people's biggest fear. When I did a segment of the show, a couple of years back now, called what was it? Fear and Loathing on the Appalachian Trail. What are the things you feared? And most people feared not finishing. And yet the odds are against people finishing in every case.
Yeah.
You've got a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 shot of finishing. Yeah, that was people's fear of not finishing. So I entirely understand how you mean. But, no one should ever feel bad about doing 800 miles of the trail.
Absolutely.
Or your parents doing 100 and something miles. That's a long darn way. So
it really is. And you know what? Half the battle is getting out there. And I think I remember in a prior podcast, you talking really 50% of it is getting out, putting yourself in the position to get out on the trail and just start.
Now, when we spoke before, you also told me you summited in Katahdin. By the way, after 1,800 miles, so it was really an epic, it wasn't quite your finish, but it's still an epic hike going up Katahdin anyway. You told me you summited with somebody who was doing an FKT. Tell us about, is it Captain Morgan?
Yes, Captain Morgan. We summited with him. Also with, I don't know if you've ever heard of Larry the Log.
I'd hesitate to ask how he got his name, but yeah.
Right. Look. He's a retired veteran, and he carries a 20-foot log with him, and he raises money for veterans.
20 foot?
Yeah, 20 foot. No, 20 pound. 20 pound. No, I'm sorry. 20 pound, like 6 or 8 foot log. And he carries that on all his hiking, and he summited the same day. But back to your original thing, Captain Morgan was doing an FKT, fastest known time, for a northbound through hike. And at the same time, there was a guy going southbound. So they were going to cross at some point. Nice. So I think it was like we summited Katahdin on July 15th. See, to me, all the dates line up. We started March 15th. We summited Katahdin July 15th. Ooh. And we summited Springer August 15th. And nice. So, especially being the accountant, I love it when the numbers line up. And it was great. But I had started following Christian Morgan back, in June, back when he started. And I'm doing the math, and it's like, well, he's got to make it in 40 or 45 days, because I knew that was the record. And I figured, well, he might pass us, or we might get a chance to see him. And then I started following him on Instagram, and then kind of forgot about it. We get up to Katahdin. Dave and I were up there with our family. There's like 8 of us up there. And I turn around I'm just resting. I turn around and look back at the sign, and there's this guy standing there. And he looks familiar, but not real familiar. And I said, "Hey, are you that FKT guy?" And he goes, "Yeah, I am." I said, "Wow, we've been following you. Cool." And, of course, the second question was, "Well, did you make it?" And he said he is the second fastest person.
So he did in 43, 44 days?
43. But you know what? He's doing another attempt this summer.
Good
so that's
Lord.
Kind of cool. Good luck to him.
Good Lord.
That's a different way to do the trail.
So you had the epic finish. You went back to Damascus and headed south and so on. Tell us about your Springer finish. What was that like? Did it feel special, or did it feel like that those last 400 miles were just tacked on, or did you enjoy that whole thing?
Yeah, best day on the trail, summiting Katahdin. Second best day, finishing up at Springer. Because by that time, I was done. I wanted to be done after it had been 5 months. And so, yeah, we went down to Damascus, flew back down there. And I was going to get off trail, actually, in another 1 or 2 weeks after that, the end of July.
Right.
And to go to a wedding in Ohio. And so we hiked. And the trail was wonderful. Totally different hike. You got the Nobo and the Sobo.
I'm sure, yeah.
We were, it was all about Nobos. And then it was almost like the Nobos against the Sobos, right? You kind of have that going on. Just a fun type of competition. And then we became a Sobo. And that hike was totally different. It was starting July 15th or like 17th maybe. No one around, in between seasons, right? All the Nobos had already started. The Sobos hadn't made it down there that far.
That's right, yeah.
A totally different hike. There was no one on the trail. I mean, like maybe 1 or 2 hikers each day. So yeah, totally different. But the trails in Tennessee, especially coming out of Damascus, the first 60 miles is like flat. We are hitting like upper 20s. We did some low 30s each day, which probably pushed it. It pushed it too much. Destroyed my feet, blisters and all by the end. But like people do, lost both big toenails, on each foot. That's kind of painful too.
I lost all 10 toenails first time. All 10.
All 10.
Yeah,
ouch.
every single
That
bloody one.
Must
I lost
hurt.
5 or 6 second time as well. Yeah. So I've lost more than 15 toenails in my 2 Appalachian hikes.
and they grow back, right?
Oh yeah, they grow back. They're pretty manky, but they tend to grow back. Yeah, it's okay.
Right. Yeah. So we get into Tennessee, and of course, there's no bugs there, right? We had some flies and stuff up north, but it wasn't that bad, and the weather wasn't that bad. It was warm, but it wasn't real humid. We knew the humidity because we lived in Georgia. So Tennessee, no bugs, a little flatter. Beautiful hiking trails. You actually have dirt. I mean, dirt on the trails, right? Instead of rocks and roots.
That's right.
It's amazing. Watauga Lake, right in Tennessee. Beautiful lake, deep lake. Oh, I camped right on the shore there. North Carolina, getting in there. Yeah, it was a totally different hike for us. And I think near the end, we, especially when we got into Georgia, it was, funny thing is, it took my parents 7 years to hike through Georgia, and it took us about 3 days. I mean, that's just kind of how it is, right? At the end, you're just pushing to get it done.
You're racing. You're racing,
and it is what it is. And we ended up hiking those last 9 days. We encountered rain, I think 7 out of 9 days, and raining all day. That was kind of brutal because it just does a number on your feet, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
But we finished up August 15th. My wife and then actually my son and his family, our granddaughter, met us at the 1 mile to go parking lot, and then waited for Dave to come in, and then we all hiked it together. Of course, there was
as I always call it, that scrubby little path up Springer Mountain.
That scrubby little path. Of course, there was a rattlesnake along the way for good measure. Yeah, it's like, I can't get away from those things. So, but it was really nice and so happy to finish. And it's been wonderful being home. But, you think about it every day, and that's fine. Those are great memories.
So you felt accomplished, and you've said before that the intensity of the accomplishment keeps kind of growing almost. Are you one and done, or did this like spark in you to do another long distance hike?
I would do another one if my wife came with me. Let's put it that way. The odds of that happening are probably slim to none. She would do a couple night overnight hike, I think. Like there's a trail down here, the Pine Mountain Trail in Georgia. She might do that, but I don't think she's in for the through hiking, which is fine. So you know what? I'm fine with just hiking during the day, or you could call me a one and done, and I am totally happy with that.
Well, you scratched an itch. And I just wonder whether the itch has gone away yet. But if it has, that's great, because I know for some people it isn't. For many people, it awakens a desire to do more of this sort of stuff. But I also understand, having touched that sign, how good it feels it is actually over as well. There's a relief, there's an accomplishment, there's all sorts of things, and as long as you experience and recognise those emotions, then it's all valid. The whole thing of the fact you want to get home. Of course, you want to get home. Why wouldn't you want to get home? But you really miss it. I miss it every day.
Yeah, you absolutely miss it. And, and it changes over time. Like you said, right now, I feel better about going back and doing parts of the trail as opposed to like when I first stopped, when I finished, I was done. I was like, my legs, it took me 5 months to recover. And my son's out there, Dave's out there running 10 miles after a week. And I'm still doing the hiker hobble. I hobbled for 3 months, Steve. It took me 5 months and there's still little aches and pains. And maybe some of that is getting old, but, shoulders and toes are still a little numb and stuff, but that's okay. I can put up with that kind of stuff. It was worth it.
It took me 5 or 6 months to even be able to walk upstairs properly. I couldn't without, I was in terrible state. So, it is, I don't want anybody to take away from, I love the fact that this show inspires people to go out and do the hike, but be aware, this is a physical, it smashes the crap out of you, doesn't it? It literally reduces you to something which shouldn't be walking that much. You do this 2,200 mile walk, and it can kill your knees, it can kill your legs, kill your feet, your toes, the whole 9 yards. And yet, it is all of that pain, all of that anguish. The moment you touch that sign, it is all worthwhile. So I would never regret having gone out and done it.
Absolutely that, and you know what? Also, the food part of it. I ate Pop-Tarts every day for 151 days straight. I am fine eating Pop-Tarts now. I could eat some ramen even. I haven't, but I probably could. It doesn't bother me. I can eat cheese and crackers because that's what we had on the trail every day. And it just kind of reminds me of it. And so it's kind of cool to do that. Now, I was never into oatmeal. I carried oatmeal for 2 months thinking it was my reserve dinner and I never needed it. And so I ditched it. I never got into the oatmeal thing. But no, food is wonderful. And, again, just great memories. I do want to mention one thing, though. You had on your last week, I think, your podcast, you had Moron.
Yes, what a name.
Yeah, and I came over. We were hiking with over Apple Orchard Mountain in Virginia, and on the other side of it, the north side of it, and this guy came up behind me, and he was really going fast, and we ended up talking, and it was Moron, and I stayed with him for like 3 minutes. He was fast. Yeah, he was fast. So I met Moron, but then also Blaze Dog. And I'd mentioned we hiked with Blaze Dog a couple of times and flip-flopped a little bit jumped with him a little bit in Virginia and places like that. And then he summited a little bit after us. But yeah, he was a great guy too.
It's funny. I've enjoyed having people on the show who've shared the trail with some of my other guests, and yet you've all got a different story. So I've got one guest coming up in a couple of weeks' time on the show who hiked with one of our previous guests all the way, yet they've both got entirely different stories. So I love that part of it. This is your adventure. Well, look, I appreciate you reaching out to me and coming on the show. Shame that Forrest didn't want to come and join us as well, but that's the way it goes. One day, if he changes his mind, I bet he'll have a different story to you as well. So let him know the invitation's always there. Okay, mate. Well, good to talk to you, and hopefully we run into each other sometime.
All right, Steve. Thanks so much. Cheers.
Cheers, then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
For a guy who says he's quite reserved, Mark certainly was chatty, wasn't he? His enthusiasm for the trail was so evident, and he really got into it. I thought it was interesting that he and David split up for a while. I probably didn't imagine they'd do that, but a through hike has a way of moderating your expectations along the way, and splitting up temporarily was right for the two of them. What about that flip, starting in Damascus? I think that wouldn't be a bad way to do it if you intended to do a flip. You're mainly Nobo, but you get some time at the end to head south as well. And by the way, some of the references to future guests and past guests weren't exactly correct because some have already been on. But that's what happens when you have to schedule a whole bunch of shows that you're trying to keep a balance with. Now, the last member of our class of 2023 to start. You may recall that Nancy Farrell's boyfriend had been having some health issues the last time we spoke, and that Nancy's start from Springer had been delayed. Well, plans change, so Nancy's on today to catch us up with where she is in her plans. Here's Nancy. Hello.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hey, Nancy. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. How was your little escapade? I saw your live video on Facebook.
It was great. I really enjoyed it. We did about 40 miles in 5 days, which is a bit like starting an AT hike, really. So, I think it was a good test for us. And we all came through it. So I guess it was worth it. I really enjoyed it. I had a really good time, and I slept in a hammock for the first time.
Yeah, I saw that. That was so funny to watch you try to get into that hammock. Oh, my God.
Yeah, dear. Well, look. We're going to talk about you, though. This is
okay.
Because this is. I'm not going to introduce you. This is Nancy Farrell, and you're the one of our class of 23 who hasn't yet started. So tell us what the state of play is right now.
Well, the state of play is really good. I'm super excited to tell you that I am planning to start by the end of the week. Wow.
So where are you now then? You came across to Maine or New Hampshire where you got family?
Yes. I'm in my home on the seacoast in New Hampshire. Nice. And I'm just gathering all of my belongings, my backpacks, and sorting out the last minute items, deciding because I'm starting now in June, basically, instead of March, like some of the sorts of gear, like my quilt, I had bought a 0 degree quilt to start in March. Yeah. So I'm trying to sort out, what do I bring instead? So just, a few of those last minute things, but,
Sure.
Yeah. And then I'll just take the train. I decided to train down to Washington, D.C. and then on to Harper's Ferry. And
nice.
And then just spend the night and then get started finally. Wow. I'm so excited. So it was a long time in coming.
Before you start though, you're obviously just fill us in with how your boyfriend's doing. Is he better now?
Yes, thank you for asking, Steve. I appreciate that. We are both super, super grateful that the surgery he had went really well. Right. And the first 2 weeks of recovery, which basically is today, is exactly 2 weeks, were the most important ones. And, he's basically ticked all the boxes. He's just done really well. And so he still has, a few weeks of like slow going, but it's super optimistic. And as I said to you, I think last time we talked, providing it went well and provided we were both comfortable with me, leaving, that was the proviso. So, so it happened and he says, off you go. So I am on my way.
You're heading out. So you're starting at Harper's Ferry. The plan is to go to Katahdin and then come back to Harper's and go south. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, absolutely. So my only hesitation is when I come back is, obviously there's not going to be as many people on the trail coming back in, I don't know, late August, September, whatever that is. But we'll deal with that. That's later, right?
But of course, there are. It isn't just through hikers who are on the trail. It's it's millions of people on the trail. So you're going to see people on there without any problem at all. Did you ever consider stopping at Baxter coming down and finishing south. Oh no, of course you can't do that because of course it won't be till about November or December till you finish, I guess, will it?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's a shame. Oh well, that's the way it goes. So do you reach out to any of the Facebook groups about who's still starting at Harper's Ferry? Because when you start, it's still quite early to be at Harper's Ferry. They say you're meant to be at Harper's by, I think it's Independence Day, to make sure you can get to Katahdin before that theoretical closing of the mountain. So you should be back in New Hampshire, Maine, sometime in September, I guess, shouldn't you?
Yes, I think so. So are you saying that you think that most of the Nobos who started, like the bubble of the Nobos, are not going to be in Harper's Ferry for another while? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I've got, in this class of 23, of the people still going, I met 7 of them at Trail Days. And that's mile 400.
Nice.
That's mile 470. Now, some were ahead of that a bit, and some were behind, but no one was at Harper's by then. So you're going to meet a lot of people coming through. You'll be hiking with a lot of people going north, no question about it. So which should be nice. You know, you're going to have the best of both worlds in many ways. You'll have that a large group of people, and then not only that, when you go south, you'll see some of the Soboers. You're going to see all sorts of people. So I wouldn't worry about being by yourself too much.
Okay, good. That's good. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I think it will make for something. It's different from what I had originally thought. But
sure.
To your point, I'm going to meet some Nobos that are going fast, and they're obviously going to be whizzing past me, and others that are going Sobo, and all the others, like you said, some section hikers and whatever. So yeah. So I'm looking forward to it. So, but
you know already though, Nancy, you should never judge yourself by what others are doing anyway. You should be working on your hike and making sure you put your hike together. It's almost like, and funny enough, I found that this last week when I was out there as well, you kind of build a hike as you go along. And I felt that we were doing that when we were out there. And when it even came to the 4th day, I certainly walked better the 4th day than I did the first day. So I could feel that improvement coming even in those early days, which I certainly didn't feel when I did my northbound hikes. So just build your hike the way you want to build it all the way, and then you'll either hike with somebody or you won't. And both those scenarios are fine. Yeah,
that's something that truly resonates in my head. Like I've heard you and I've heard so many people on your show mentioning this, to just kind of, when you start, go slow, particularly the first couple of weeks. I mean, it's like I have it like really imprinted in my head. So even if there's, wonderful people I meet over the first few days, but they're faster, I'm just going to have to resist the temptation to let them go and just go at my own pace. Yeah,
yes, and of course there'll still be other flip-floppers starting now as well. So you'll find somebody, if you decide you want to hike with somebody, you'll find somebody to hike with if you choose to do so. If you choose not to do so, then don't worry about that. Just build as it goes along. So are you second guessing some of your equipment, or are you just making the alterations because of the time of year?
So both. I'm making alteration for sure. And I'm not like 100% with the weather in June at night. So it's particularly the nighttime. It's easy to adjust the day clothes, so that's not a problem. But I'm thinking, like, do I bring my, long smart wool pants and my long sleeve, top, or do I just go to the shorts and little tank for sleeping? So, because I'm thinking, well, could it get cold at night? I mean, I'm sure when I get to the whites, that's different, but I can switch my gear because I can, get somebody to run me some clothes from home. But, But in Harper's Ferry, I'm looking at the weather forecast right now, and it's like really, oh my gosh, it's really warm during the day. And it seems okay at night, but what is it going to be like in, a week or two? So I'm hesitating with making the right choice. I don't want to be cold at night.
I would be more cautious in that case. I would take the longer sleeves, because the great thing with longer sleeves, you can roll them up.
Right. You're right.
And with short sleeves, you can't roll them down.
Yeah.
So
no, that's right.
Why not take the long ones? You'll work it out. But all these first couple of weeks, and once again, I was reminded about that this last week. It's kind of a proving ground. You're going to work out what works for you. You're going to work out where everything goes in your pack. And once you've done that, you've got it all dialed in. So just allow yourself to let the height develop and just have fun out there, because there's no purpose in doing this unless you're going to enjoy it. I'm glad that you don't. And I'm glad that you don't have to worry about, your boyfriend at home, because if he's getting better, that's great. And I'm sure he'd let you know if there was any issue, and I'm sure you just go on. Yeah.
Yeah. And on that topic too, I left with he's surrounded by amazing friends and family that I know that gives me comfort. If something happened, they'll all be running to him. Right. So I feel comfortable with that. I am not leaving with a worry in my head whatsoever. So no, that's really good. Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing that I'm trying to sort out is I'm trying to today and the next couple of days is take all my gear and repack it and then weigh it. And, last time I did this, I was,
I do. Yes, I do. Yeah.
You're trying to just you want to be as light as possible. I have a friend who's doing it. She's out there right now. And, her first word of advice is lighten up your pack as much as you can. She says, it gets heavy. She's at 1,500 mile right now. And she's like, it just gets really heavy. So I'm looking at everything and thinking, okay, do I really need this? Or can I be without? And then reweighing. And I'm at about 20 pound base weight right now. And I think it's not too bad.
Pretty good. That's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. And so, but I thought it's worth to go through and just, rethink about it. And if I save another pound, then that's great. But otherwise, I can start with it. And if it's too heavy and I don't need it, then I'll ship it home.
Sure. And if you check with Far Out, something we noticed this last week where we went from Watauga Lake up to back to Damascus. That's about 40 miles, something like that. And there wasn't a huge amount of water on the trail that was available. So it wasn't as much as I was expecting as I actually remember. But maybe that area is notorious for that. But check Far Out so you know where the water is. And I don't know how much water are you thinking of taking?
Well, I was originally thinking that I would take one big, large bottle of, a smart water bottle, so 1 liter.
Right. Okay.
No, the smart water, and then the other one, which is I think a 750. So basically, almost 2 liters to start. I would
think that's okay. But remember the thing to do is when you get to a stream, drink as much of the water as you can, and then fill up, because you're effectively carrying the water anyway. But look, I'm excited for you, because I know the others. I met 7 of our group in Damascus, as I say, and they're all excited. They're all having a blast. So I'm sure you're gonna have a great time. Just stay in touch with me. Text me any updates and things, and we'll call you and get you on the show. Get your first impressions in a couple of weeks. Okay.
That sounds like a deal. I will do that for sure, Steve.
Okay. Well, enjoy it, because that's what you're there for. Go to enjoy it. All right.
Absolutely. That's my plan.
Yeah. All right, Nancy.
Great.
Cheers then.
Thank you,
Bye.
Steve. Bye-bye.
Bye. She's really raring to go, isn't she? It must have been frustrating for her as other hikers headed out and she was deferring and deferring. Well, all good things come to those who wait. We'll catch up with Nancy in a few weeks to see how she copes with those all-important early miles. Now, Betty McEnaney and I met last year at our Woods Hole weekend. As luck would have it, early Wednesday morning, Betty and I caught up when she was at Woods Hole. Here's Betty.
Hey, good morning.
Hey, Betty, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay, and you are in one of our favourite places. Tell everybody Tell everybody where you are, what you can see.
Yeah, no, I'm in Woods Hole Hostel in Harrisburg, Virginia, and I'm looking out the window and I see the densest fog you could possibly imagine. But I know what I would be seeing on a clear day.
Yeah, it is a magnificent place, isn't it? Absolutely lovely.
What I can see are her gardens. And I see the chives, and I see all the lettuce that we had for dinner last night, and it's just fabulous.
Yeah, it's a great place. I actually saw Neville at Trail Days, and of course I saw you at Trail Days as well. So you came. So where were you when you came to Trail Days? How far ahead were you, or how far behind? You were ahead, weren't you?
Well, no, I was actually right there.
All right.
I did one slack packing day ahead. So I'm not sure what that would have put me at. It was about 20 miles north of Damascus.
Well, you've done pretty well then. You've done pretty well to get to Trail Days, to Woods Hole by now. And you sent me some video recently, which was quite amazing. It's also a place where we actually first met, I think, at Weary Feet.
Right.
So tell us about the rain there, which was quite substantial.
Yeah. The day of the rain, I was about 9 miles south of Weary Feet,
right? And
we were planning to go 15 miles that day. But the weather calling for 1 to 2 inches of rain and I had no desire to set up a tent in that. And the hostel was just that 9 miles up, and I reached out and she had roof. So there was no ifs, ands, or buts, but that's what we were going to do.
Right.
And the rain did start the last hour as we were approaching the hostel and kept going. And it went almost staggering to see the flooding that it caused.
It was amazing, wasn't it?
I just was so, yeah. I mean, and that was 24 hours. The first part of that video was 7 o'clock on Monday morning, right, and then 7 o'clock on Tuesday morning.
Because that was a walk out of where that was a walk and what. That was a walk out of Weary Feet, wasn't it? When you went up the one that really made me laugh. I showed my girlfriend last night. Was the one that you went up the stairs with the waterfalls on the stairs, virtually, wasn't it?
Yes. That's the northbound out of Weary Feet.
Yeah.
And it was still going a bit the next morning when we left.
Oh, jeez.
How the people. There's something like between Weary Feet and Woods Hole, there's something like 15 brook crossings. And there was no way that we wanted to attempt that after that rain.
Right.
So we did the 0. And yesterday we were still up to our shins, going through.
Oh dear, nasty. Well, it gets a whole lot worse up north, let me tell you. So, your shoulders. You said, as you always do, you send me some notes, which is very helpful for me. You've got a problem with your shoulders, or are they just really sort of starting to take the effect of what's going on with your body right now?
No, I really had a problem.
Uh-huh.
The pack I had was a Z pack.
Right.
And it must be made for people who carry like 15 pounds or something, not for people who carry 30 pounds.
Right.
And it just was tearing my shoulders up. It was cutting them in half.
Wow.
So when I was in Damascus, I went to Damascus Outfitters, and it was either get a new pack or get off the trail.
Oh, wow.
I had no ifs, ands, or buts. So I got the new Osprey pack. And if I had one bit of advice to give anybody, it would be don't buy something online. Go to an outfitter, get fitted, let them put the weight in it, walk around, make sure that you're getting the right thing.
Yeah.
And as soon as I got the new pack, I was fine.
Well, I totally agree with that. And I actually do have a Z-Packs, but I went to get fitted, and I thought, because I'm a big guy, I thought I'd get a large. They said, no, you don't need a large, you need a medium, because my frame is obviously not that long. My legs are quite long. And so they fitted me with a medium, and it fitted me perfectly. So, that point about getting fitted is so important. And, of course, at Trail Days, you had the opportunity to try a number on, didn't you?
Well, I didn't get it at Trail Days. I got it at the Damascus Outfitter.
Oh, right. You actually went to the Outfitter. Okay. Right.
But the hip straps were about 2 feet too long on both sides.
Wow.
So I waited till Thursday morning of Trail Days to go to the Osprey folks to cut them off.
Okay.
And stitch them. And then I had it on Friday morning.
And how's it feeling? Is it fitting much better for you? And how are your shoulders now?
Oh, it's night and day. I mean, I had to take 6 zeros for over 30-day period.
Wow.
Because my shoulders were bad.
Wow.
Weekend one, except for the flood day.
Yeah.
And I'm now I'm doing 12 to 15 months. So it's night and day.
That's fantastic. It's always good to know when you get one that fits you. And I used to find I had to adjust mine quite often, but that kind of all worked out at the end. And you mentioned Tramleys. Are you with a group of people now, or have you attracted new people to the fold?
Yeah, no, I had been with the same group for almost 400 miles. Mm-hmm. The same 5 people that had started on the same day. Uh-huh. And then when I was having the shoulder troubles and I had to back off, I missed them. I'm like 2 days behind them.
Right.
And another gal and I started to hike together, and then she had family come. So now she's a couple of days behind me. So it comes and goes, but you keep bumping into people that you've seen along the way.
Yeah, and I think that's a positive to allow yourself to be open to different people all the time, because a tramley is such a dynamic thing. I mean, some people stay right from beginning to end, but be open to allowing yourself the possibility of meeting new people the whole time. And I love that part of the trail.
Yeah, and I like to hike by myself because I'll stop and take 50 pictures a day. And if you're in a line with 10 people, that doesn't work.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And then you connect with people at the end of the day.
Now, your next point on the message was Grayson Highlands versus pastures. Who wins that one, as far as you're concerned?
Yeah. Oh, the pastures. In my head, I thought Grayson Highlands was going to be these lush meadows with the little ponies that come trotting up to you. And it's nothing like that. It's, these hills and rocks and more rocks and scrubby, bushes and stuff. But then like 3 or 4 days later, you start hitting these beaches and the cows come running through. And it's just gorgeous. I mean, it was like going home to Vermont. Yeah. No, the pastures win big time.
Well, but they call them, you mean the boards? Oh, actually going through pastures. I'm trying to think where you go through pastures. I actually went to one south of Damascus. I went through from Tennessee 91, a lovely walk through the pasture. I know there are a few further on as well. Yeah. I love those as well, but you're right. I always remember the rocks in Grayson Highlands, and I know everybody looks forward to seeing the ponies, but you feel the rocks before you see the ponies, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, and some of them are huge. Some of them are, hand over hand climbing, and then am I really on the trail? And then you look down and you think, that's what I'm supposed to be going down. Yeah.
Oh dear. So all in all, I know you're not matter of fact, but you're quite straightforward about things. Would you say that this is still the adventure you enjoy as much as you did, or is it getting tougher? I mean, how are you feeling right now?
I feel good. I mean, over 25% mark. I forget what the number was, 549.
Yeah.
So I'm at like 6.25.
Yeah.
I can look forward to seeing some folks in Roanoke as I get up there, and then you realize, wow, when I get there, I'm halfway through Virginia. I mean, so yeah, I'm not disappointed at all. And I'm also looking forward to, and my son and daughter-in-law and grandkids, and Bruce will probably drive the car here and there, and they're all athletes, so they will have no trouble hiking, and it will be fun to spend a couple of days with them.
Don't spend too long. I always think when people when people come to visit you, you think it's a great idea, but you by now are a hiking machine, and I wonder how people will stay with you. But it's lovely. It's always lovely to see people come and visit you. So it's always worth it. But it may slow your hike a little bit. But so what? Then the lady behind you will catch up. So you can be. There's a good thing there as well. Well, look, I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. I'm glad you're still going well, and we'll catch up again in a couple of weeks. Okay, Betty?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, Betty. Cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
I'll tell you, a couple of the videos were pretty nasty. She certainly had some rain and is still loving it. Go Betty. Just before we move on, I wanted to thank our wonderful donors from the past 2 weeks, because I missed out thanking them last week. So, Monthly donors are the very same: Betty McEnaney, Michael Garsh, Ann Pickin, Sean Deb Wiley, Sharon James, Kevin Weidman, Emmanuel Bravo Ramos, Jessica Diaz, Hugh Eckrath, Justin Mullins, Kevin Eastman and Dobson, while we also received generous donations from Andrew Cohen and Richard Lehman. While a very kind lady also sent a lovely donation in the mail but asked to remain anonymous. So thanks to all of you for keeping faith with the podcast. I so appreciate your support. Remember, you can donate on our hikingradionetwork.com website, or even buy one of my books, or a shirt or a mug from hrntradingpost.com. We've had a nice uptick in sales from the Trading Post, so why not check it out and help us out at the same time. Cheers to one and all. Now, trail days and the hike after. I drove up via Jester's and stayed overnight with her and her partner Steph. As we always do, we laughed a lot and even did a Facebook Live to show off my new banner that I was going to use at the author's tent at Trail Days the following day. Now, this is where it started going wrong. Because some of the books on that banner aren't actually released yet, I had some magnetic name tags to tell about the availability of the two upcoming books. The first one's going to be ready in December, the next one in fall next year. Of course, those tags, because they're magnetic, were removable. But when I packed up the banner, I forgot to remove the tags. They were swallowed up in the bowels of the banner base, and I could not get them out. It was a bit of a nightmare, but it worked out at Trail Days, and I told people about when those books would be available. And at Trail Days itself, I met tons of people. Believe it or not, 7 of our Mighty Blue class of 23 showed up to say hi. Let's see if I can remember them all. There was Mary Marks with her dog Wiley, Dale Shotkowski, Ron Ward, Betty McEnaney, Steve Noda, Jessica Lang Wright and Brian Robbins. We started with 14 members. 4 have dropped out that I've told you about, while I think that 2 are accepting that they won't be finishing a through hike this year. So 7 turning up in Damascus was quite something. As to the event itself, I probably got more cash from listeners to support the show than I did from profits from the sale of my books. People just showed up, told me they loved the show, and had to be cash. I got lots of pictures with people and even met some guests I'd interviewed in the past but hadn't met, including Sarah Allison, or Sheepdog, Maria Wishart, or Wheezy P, Jeff Gray, Lona, as well as Greg G. Bolt Behrens. Also, Terry Lugo, Mr. Fabulous himself, and Tonya Monarch Lonsbury perched on the end of my table and sold a few of their own books. You know, it's funny, but seeing all the thru-hikers at Trail Days reminds me that this was, and in fact is, my community. They have the same joyous determination we all had back in 2019 and 2014. They seem a breed apart, and once you're no longer doing a thru-hike, they all seem invincible. It was wonderful to meet such a cross-section of the trail community, and it felt like a real privilege to be there. Then, on Sunday morning, the fat guys were back in the woods. John, Bain, Russ and me, or Lumberjack, Sherpa, Lucky Dog and Mighty Blue, drove back to Boots Off in Hampton to hike back to Damascus. It was about a 40-mile hike, which we did in 5 pretty casual days. I think we all immediately felt at home and had a lot of laughs. Sherpa's wonderful wife, Rita, surprised us, well, me, with Trail Magic at Tennessee 91, where in fact I also met Deb Taylor and Danny Mooney, who I've additionally interviewed in the past. I did the whole 5 days sleeping in a hammock for the very first time. I'm going to be talking more about that experience in a few weeks on the Hammock Hangers podcast with Paul Collins, or Skunk Ape. But suffice it to say, I probably had the best sleep I've ever had it on the trail in the hammock. I made a ridiculous error, which I won't go into now, but I loved the whole thing. So much so that if I were ever to go on the AT again for an extended period of time, I think it would be a hammock for Mighty Blue. Look, thanks for indulging me in that. I had a blast in those 5 days, plus Trail Days. How could you not? Finally, George is in Vermont and getting support from his mum. How wonderful that must be. I'll see you next week. Chapter 19, Day Tripping, North Adams, Massachusetts to Sherburne Pass, Vermont. Sunday the 21st of August 1983, mile 1574.9. Although day hiking freed me from a great deal of pack weight today, it does impose new restrictions of its own. Roads passable by ordinary passenger automobile are scarce in the Green Mountain Range of Vermont, and my hike required a passable road at both ends. Today's hike worked out to almost 19 miles, the section of the Appalachian Trail between Massachusetts 2 and Vermont 9, so I wanted a reasonably early start. Yeah, I hit the trail at 12:15. I didn't allow my late start to get me down, however. I had a couple of great breakfasts in North Adams before leaving, and the weather was beautiful, just as the forecasters had predicted. My mother dropped me off at the AT crossing of Massachusetts 2 and drove off into Vermont to check into our motel. I followed the AT across its footbridge over the Hoosick River and began walking northward to Vermont. Following a short road walk, the AT turned up a private driveway, then into the woods. The climb out of the Hoosick Valley was long, but on a nice section of trail, scenic and excellently graded. The initial mile and a half ascended alongside a stream named Sherman Brook, past a variety of cascades and small waterfalls. Next, an old woods road led me away from the brook, climbing along a ridge to the top of East Mountain. There was one steep scramble up a rock slide before the trail broke out of the forest into an open area on the ridge crest with great views southward across the valley. The neighbouring large towns of North Adams and Williamstown spread out below, covering a broad, relatively flat section of the river valley. Mount Greylock rose massively as a backdrop to the south, and westward I could make out a northern spur of the Taconics. A short while later, another climb brought me to a spot called F's Lookout with similar views. After the second lookout, the Appalachian Trail levelled off as it followed the ridge crest. Less than a mile later, I arrived at a Green Mountain Club trail register. I was at the Vermont state line and the southern terminus of the Long Trail, a footpath which follows the crest of the Green Mountains through Vermont to its Canadian border. The Appalachian Trail traverses the southernmost 100 miles of this trail before turning east near Sherburne Pass to strike out towards the White Mountains of New Hampshire. More than 1,500 miles and about 3.5 months of walking behind me, I had arrived in northern New England at last. I signed the register and headed out. 4 southbound backpackers who were hanging out there taking a break informed me that I would enjoy Vermont, while the AT in New Hampshire and Maine was terrible. They were very happy to be past those 2 states. I didn't give their opinion too much weight. I expected the Appalachian Trail to be difficult in those 2 states. I knew from experience that the trail in the White Mountains was not for the faint of heart. I also know that they contain some of the most spectacular scenery on the AT. After 1,500 miles of backpacking, I suspect I'm in considerably better shape than those guys were, and I'm prepared to pay the price to enjoy the rewards earned through my struggles. There was some tough trail in North Carolina and Georgia towards the beginning of my hike. By the time the surviving southbounders reach those mountains, they will be far better equipped to handle the rough spots than I was at the time. The initial miles of the Appalachian Trail in Vermont pass through beautiful forests of northern hardwoods, spruce and fir, with an abundance of birch trees, including many fine stands of white birch, one of the loveliest of trees. Slender and graceful, their dazzling white bark makes a startling and pleasing contrast with the grey tones of the surrounding woods. Now that I'm in northern New England, I'll be seeing more and more of these beauties. Thanks to the spruce, the fir, the white birch, the sugar maples, and all the varieties of moss and ferns spreading over the forest floor, today felt like a homecoming for me. The mountains of northern New England were my first love as a backpacker, and many elements of their boreal forests were present today. I crossed County Road along the ridge crest 7 miles into the hike. My original intention had been to hike the 13.5 miles from Greylock's summit to this road yesterday, until I noticed that would leave me with a short day today as a result of the lack of road crossings along the trail in Vermont. I revised my plans accordingly. One look at the road today made me glad I did. My guidebook called this a gravel road passable by car. It was in fact a 1-lane rutted dirt track with about 3 pieces of gravel to the square yard. My mother would have been thrilled driving solo over this road yesterday evening to pick me up. There were a few nice views a mile and a half later from the high point of a nameless ridge that was my second 3,000-foot summit since Shenandoah National Park, Greylock being the first. A scenic little beaver pond, tiny white caps ruffling in the breeze, sat beside the trail just after the descent from that ridge. The AT continued through the woods, passing over a series of small knobs along the ridge crest and skirting the shores of a couple more small, secluded ponds formed by beaver dams in little mountain brooks. Towards the end of the day, just before Congdon Camp, I ran into Pete. We updated each other on our through hikes as we walked together to the shelter, a 4-sided wooden cabin. He told me that he had also met those 4 southbound through hikers I ran into at the Vermont border. Having shared a shelter with Crazy Charlie the previous night, they were raving about what a great guy he was. I laughed and told him that I knew there was something wrong with him. Pete smiled as he informed me that the shelter at which Charlie had stayed was Seth Warner. He had left Mount Greylock that morning and managed 13 miles, a respectable first day back, but certainly not material for the ever-growing legend of himself Charlie was creating. I told Pete he could be sure that the mileage would grow as Charlie talked about it with subsequent hikers. I took a short break at Congdon Camp and headed out, saying goodbye to Pete, who was spending the night. I couldn't stay long because my watch had died for no apparent reason. I told my mother to meet me at 8:15 on Vermont 9. That was 4 miles ahead, and I had no clue as to the current time. 2.5 miles later, I came upon the grassy, scrub-grown summit of Harmon Hill, with the finest views of the day. To the west, the small city of Bennington, Vermont, lay cradled in a long green valley surrounded by mountains. From that summit, the Appalachian Trail descended into a deep, narrow, wooded valley. The final mile or so was rather steep, but no killer. It was the only tricky piece of hiking I encountered all day long. I'd heard that the long trail was very strenuous and not well graded, a traditional New England footpath. That was not the case today. The footway was carefully engineered with log walkways over the boggy stretches and modern methods of erosion control on the slopes. The last descent even had some switchbacks. It was definitely not a stereotypical New England trail. It turned out I managed to complete the day's mileage at 7:45, so I had to wait a half hour for my ride. I need to get a new watch soon. At least this one lasted more than 1,300 miles. My first watch died before I'd hiked 200. My mother picked me up right on schedule at 8:15, and I drove us to the motel she had found about 2 miles down Route 9 from the Appalachian Trail crossing. We ate in an Italian restaurant near the motel. The lady who owned the place sat at the table with us and chatted with my mother while her kids prepared the meal. The food was good, but it was a strange experience watching our chef running in and out to play with his little friends while his assistant scooted around the dining room on her roller skates. I can only hope that they were more scrupulous about washing their hands than I was at their age. Monday the 22nd of August, 1983. Mile 1595.5. The weatherman called for all-day showers today. I fortified myself with a couple of balanced breakfasts before hitting the trail at 10:15, hiking in running shoes. The soles of my hiking boots were once again beginning to peel. Not much, but I thought it best to take care of the problem now. My mother was able to take them to a cobbler today while I was hiking, enabling me to get them repaired without the necessity of taking a day off from the Appalachian Trail. Along with my running shoes, I was wearing about a ton of muskol. The black flies remain out in force. In a normal year, these swarms of biting pests have died out early in the summer around here, but this has been no normal year in any respect. I dealt with bumper crops of flies, gnats and mosquitoes this summer, so I guess it's only fitting that the black flies should linger to take their crack at me. The sky was beginning to cloud over as I started up the relatively steep climb from Vermont 9 to the ridgecrest. An interesting feature along that ascent was encountered when the trail passed between the two halves of a gigantic split boulder. They stood several feet apart and the facing sides were a perfect match. Glacial ice had cleft the rock and separated the pieces like some immense supernatural force. In the register at Norheim Shelter, located near the top of the climb, many hikers complained about the severity of the ascent. I didn't find it to be all that bad. The switchbacks and rock steps had alleviated the difficulty somewhat, and the AT kept crossing the eroded remnants of the original trail, which had leapt straight up that acclivity. After seeing what the old trail had looked like, I was content with the new one. I passed below a power line about 2 miles into the day. I made note of the spot because that is where the first raindrops of the day began to spatter against my face. Soon I was wearing my rain gear and the rain was coming down steadily. It never completely stopped during the remainder of the hike. There were a few good lookouts along the wooded ridgecrest, and none were totally obscured by clouds. Rather than the usual solid, low overcast, this rainy day in the mountains was marked by a higher, mid-level overcast, with scattered small clouds drifting past at my altitude. The trail elevation hovered in the 3,000 to 3,500 foot range all day, while the ceiling was at about 5,000 feet. Between those occasional viewpoints, the Appalachian Trail passed through twilight stands of spruce and fir alternating with hardwood forests of maple, beech and birch. Occasional bursts of heavier rain pelted the mountains. About halfway through the hike, high up on the slope of Glastonbury Mountain, I arrived at Glastonbury Mountain Shelter. A heavy downpour had just concluded, and the sky was brightening considerably as the rain tapered off into a fine mist. The shelter was packed with hikers, including Crazy Charlie and several other through hikers. We all talked and laughed about the joys of an Appalachian Trail through hike. Even on a rather sombre and miserable day like today, everyone seemed to share my recent upbeat mood. We have all of us walked such a long, hard road, and the light at the end of the tunnel is becoming so bright it's almost dazzling. When I left the shelter, I had a 1/4-mile climb to Glastonbury Mountain summit. A dense forest of tall spruce shut off all the views, but an old United States Forest Service fire tower rose above the treetops into the opaque white sky. I spent several minutes up at the top, enjoying ethereal views of misty mountains and fog-shrouded valleys with patches of low-level clouds streaming past. It was fitting adornment for a mythical land of cool green forests which glistened in the daydreams of a tired, discouraged wanderer trudging the blistering landscapes of a long-ago summer. The scene was mesmerising, but it was windy and quite cold up there above the treetops, so I reluctantly dragged myself away. I descended the mountain through another dismally beautiful northern spruce and fir forest. It was dark and boggy, furred with lustrous green mosses. Small forest glades sported dense mats of lush ferns. Rain is no stranger to these northern mountains. 4 miles later, at Cornerwaga Shelter, I ran into Pete. We talked for a few minutes, but I had to head on. He was staying there tonight while I still had 6 miles to go. The train had been rugged and the footway slippery from the rain. I was not making good time. It was 4:45 when I left the shelter, and I was expected at the trailhead at 6:45. I was not going to make it on time. I did my best, but just couldn't manage to move very fast over all that mud and the wet, mossy rocks. I walked in a continuous downpour from just past Glastonbury Mountain to the end of today's trail, journeying along boggy ridges speckled with beaver ponds. The dark, brooding aspect of the spruce fir forests was enhanced by the rain and fog. The evening was cold and dreary, but somehow hauntingly lovely. Of course, it's much easier to savour the experience of a day such as this when you know a hot shower and clean, dry clothing await you at the trail's end. I came out on the Arlington-West Wardsboro Road at 7:15. A half-hour late, but my ride was not there. The road was dirt-surfaced at the Appalachian Trail crossing, so I began to walk down the road in the direction from which my mother was coming, figuring I would eliminate some of the unpaved portion of the drive. She drove up as I was walking a few minutes later. She had become lost, as the beginning of this road was somewhat difficult to locate. I drove back to the motel. It was a slow ride through all that fog. I had earned my 20 miles today and the long, hot shower afterwards. Tuesday the 23rd of August, 1983. Mile 1610.2. A dazzlingly fine day, a beautiful section of trail, another late start. I didn't begin hiking until 1 p.m, partially because, as my mother had last night, I missed the very obscure turn-off onto the Arlington Road. The initial 4 miles were a piece of cake. The Appalachian Trail traversed flat terrain through dense forests. I breezed quickly over that stretch to make some time for later. I came out of the woods at Stratton Pond, a large mountain lake in a shallow hollow encircled by low ridges. It was a lovely spot, particularly on a crystal-clear day like today, with the blue water glittering in the sunlight. The hollow was a slight depression in a wide plateau, which nestled against the western slope of 3,900-foot Stratton Mountain. The western shore of the lake gave a picturesque view of that famous mountain, which would be covered with skiers in a few short months. Until a short time ago, the Appalachian Trail had swung around the south and west shores of the pond before making a long dogleg past another pond, passing for 6 miles through a region recently designated by Congress as the Liebrook Wilderness Area. They create wilderness areas in national parks and forests to preserve undeveloped and scenic areas in as close to their pristine condition as is possible. A wilderness designation prevents roads, buildings, or any other features incompatible with the concept of wilderness from being constructed in these places. For reasons of their own, the powers that be decided that the Appalachian Trail itself was incompatible with the wilderness designation, and the trail was rerouted around Liebrook. The relocation shortened the trail by about 2 miles, but I had heard that the old trail was much more scenic, so I followed the old trail through the wilderness. The former AT was very rough and poorly blazed compared to the present trail, but it was worth the extra effort mileage. Initially, it skirted the south shore of the pond, a sparkling cobalt through the trees. After brushing the western shore with that view of Stratton Mountain, the trail passed through several mossy bogs, crossing them on wooden bridging and stepping stones. I emerged from the woods at Bourne Pond, which the trail skirted with more gorgeous views of Stratton Mountain across the water. Bourne Pond was almost as large as Stratton Pond and just as lovely. The Appalachian Trail followed an old logging railroad grade along the shore of the pond and for another mile as it followed the course of Bourne Brook, the pond's outlet. The trail followed this brook for 4 or 5 miles, sometimes on paths and occasionally on woods roads. The brook and the surrounding forests were pretty, but the trail maintenance seemed to have virtually ceased since the Appalachian Trail was relocated. The route became very iffy a few times. At one point, it ended abruptly in the middle of some tall weeds in a large marsh. I spent about 20 minutes trying to locate some sign of a path before giving up and bushwhacking for a while until I had found it once more. Soon afterwards, I rejoined the current AT at the point at which it crossed the brook and turned down an old jeep road. I followed this road for a mile to an outcrop called Prospect Rock, located at the salient where a precipitous set of southward-facing cliffs met a vertical westward-facing cliff. A sweeping panoramic view of the town of Manchester, Vermont, its green valley and the surrounding mountains detained me for 15 minutes as I chatted with a couple of local men, one of whom was a 1980 thru hiker. This had been my lone stop of the day, but I was still running late. I was supposed to be at the trailhead at 7:30. I left Prospect Rock at 6 o'clock, with more than 5 miles remaining to be hiked. I was not going to make it on time today either. 3 miles later, I made a side trip to Spruce Peak, which had another fantastic view of Manchester's valley and the mountain backdrop to the west. Except for this 15-minute detour, I put my head down and flew the rest of the way. For the final mile, the Appalachian Trail followed an abandoned gravel road, which at one time was a portion of Vermont Highway 30, the state road which was my destination for tonight. It was now a ribbon of tall grass and ferns with an extremely narrow strip of gravel peeking through where hikers' footsteps kept down the undergrowth. The old highway clung to the side wall of a small gorge. The wooden guardrails projecting through the tall bush on the left side of the path, where the ground dropped precipitously towards the floor of the gorge, were the sole remaining indications I was walking on what used to be a main thoroughfare. I arrived at the current Vermont 30 at 8 o'clock, a full half-hour late, and drove back to the motel beneath an enormous Vermont moon. This is a very different way of seeing the country than backpacking. Then I saw a long, narrow corridor. Now I'm getting a much broader picture of the surrounding area as well. I'm growing rather fond of Vermont's tidy little villages, green pastures and deep evergreen forests. Although I live in nearby Connecticut, I had never spent a great deal of time in this state. I will do so in the future. I passed the 1,600-mile mark of the hike today, as well as the three-quarters point of the Appalachian Trail. Tomorrow, I hit the first major Green Mountain peaks crossed by the AT. The weather is supposed to hold, so it should be a great day. I'm going to try to get to bed early tonight.